All right. Let me share. Got lots of things popped up here. So let's do, where am I at here? Why isn't it, oh, here we go. All right. Loading, of course, everybody's on here, so.
Well, thank you guys for being here. We have a good size so far. Please ensure, I'm just scrolling through right now, that you have your full name listed as your name. If we cannot verify attendance, we cannot give you your CE credits. So if you need to change your name the way it appears in Zoom, what you do is you go to the participant list, find your name, hover your mouse over it, click more, and then click on rename. If you don't know how to do that, just please put your full name in the chat box. But it would be best if you could change your name completely. Okay. All right, so let's get started. So this is rehabilitative yoga for the incarcerated population. I'll introduce ourselves. So Jordan, you can go to the next slide. Okay, so hi guys, my name's Jen. I'm a student here at the Chicago School in the Clinical Mental Health Counseling Program. I'm also the student chair for this virtual conference, so if you have any questions at all, I'm going to put my email in the chat. Please note that it's a busy week, so unless it's something super urgent, I probably won't get back to you super quickly. So I'm a graduate assistant here, just like Jordan. I have about 3 weeks left until I graduate. I have my bachelor's in psychology from Northeastern. I'm president of our chapter of Chi Sigma Iota. I also serve on the leadership and professional advocacy committee. In my community, I live in the suburbs outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and I'm involved in a lot of advocacy groups committed to ensuring the rights of all. So in my area, we have a private prison, which is a big point of contention. And I've been a part of groups who are working to deprivatize this prison because they are putting profits over people. So that's kind of what spurred me to this population. And then also I love yoga. I try to practice yoga every day, and I found the practice to be really calming and helpful as a grad student.
My name is Jordan, and I'm also a graduate student pursuing my master's degree in the Clinical Mental Health Counseling Program. I just transferred from a Las Vegas graduate program to here, so I'm only in about my 4th term so far, and I am also a student chair on the virtual conference committee. So this is my first time doing anything major like this, so I was really happy that Jen was able to sort of spearhead that for me and sort of show me the ropes. So I do have my Bachelor's of Arts degree in psychology with a minor in American Sign Language from the University of North Florida. And this past December was my first ever professional conference that I was able to present in. So while I don't have a lot under my belt yet, Jennifer has been great in sort of getting me ready for when she leaves. So I'm excited to present this to you, and we hope you enjoy it. Thank you.
And like Jordan said, so we just recently presented this at the Association for Creativity and Counseling Conference in December. Okay, so let's talk about the background of yoga. Yoga is a 5,000-year-old tradition. It has its roots in ancient Indian philosophy. Primarily, the goals of yoga were not to get a yoga booty or to get six-pack abs, right? They were for expanding spiritual energy. That was the main goal of yoga through breathing methods and mental focus. Various styles of yoga were used and have evolved throughout the years, combining physical postures, breathing techniques, and meditation for a number of uses. So if there's any practitioners of yoga in the room right now, you know, you can put in the chat why you like it or why you practice it. But really, you can select yoga practices excuse me, for whatever it is that you want, or your level of fitness. Okay, the next slide. So similarly, mindfulness is also a years old tradition, about 2,600 years old, originated from a Buddhist concept. We attribute mindfulness's popularity in the West to a man named Jon Kabat-Zinn. So Jon Kabat-Zinn was a really interesting guy. While he was studying Buddhist philosophy at MIT, he really became entranced by mindfulness, and he described it as the psychological process of bringing one's attention to the internal and external experiences occurring in the present moment. So Kabat-Zinn, he studied under Buddhist teachers, and eventually he combined his passion for mindfulness with his scientific studies to create the stress reduction and relaxation program, later renamed something you may have heard of if you're in the counseling field, mindfulness-based stress reduction. It's a really well-known evidence-based therapeutic technique. Okay, benefits of yoga. So as you can see, this is a pretty full slide, and it's only a few of the things that we could, think of or find from research of the benefits of yoga. So I'd like you guys to either come off mute or jump in the chat and tell me a benefit of yoga that you think, and I bet you I can give you a statistic about it. What's the benefit of yoga?
Lowers blood pressure.
Lowers blood pressure. Okay. Yes, yoga has been found to have demonstrable physical health benefits. It can help improve heart health, reduce risk factors for heart disease, such as high blood pressure. Yes. One study found that participants over 40 years old who practiced yoga for 5 years had lower blood pressure and pulse rate than those who did not. I'm looking in the chat. Okay, aid in treatment for physical disabilities, absolutely. Can reduce chronic pain in conditions like carpal tunnel system and osteoarthritis, reduce inflammation, increases flexibility, like Callie said, helpful for dissociation. So I think that's a really cool concept, because yoga, we're forced to be in the present moment, right? So we're not dissociating into a past state, like detachment. What else do we have in the chat? Increased self-esteem. Absolutely. I'm going to read some additional things here. One of the most well-known benefits of yoga is yoga's ability to decrease stress and anxiety. Multiple studies have shown that yoga decreases cortisol, which is the body's primary stress hormone, right? Depression, anxiety. One study I found that I'm just blown away by is that 10 women diagnosed with PTSD, 52% of them no longer even met the criteria for PTSD after 10 weeks of once weekly yoga practice. They no longer met the criteria for PTSD. So that's a small sample size. We have to take that into consideration, but it really, and I think that goes back to what you were saying in the chat, Callie, about dissociation. When you're focusing on the present rather than fixating on past traumas or future concepts, that might be responsible for yoga's ability to really help with these symptoms. Okay, and go to the next slide, but there's just so many benefits, and these are evidence-based. These are shown. Okay, so mindfulness, very similar. The benefits of mindfulness, they closely mirror many of the benefits of yoga. Many studies have shown that practicing mindfulness can reduce stress, anxiety, depression. It's thought that mindfulness decreases rumination because you're disengaging from those perseverative cognitive activities. A 2012 study showed that participants with depression, anxiety, and stress decreased all of those by the end of a 10-week meditation course. And moreover, the people who began the course with the most severe symptoms had the most notable improvements over time. Boost to working memory, improved focus, and enhanced ability to sustain attention. numerous health benefits. And then also another really cool thing, the last point on this slide, is that mindfulness has been found to actually be able to change the brain. So it can increase gray matter in areas of the brain involved in memory, learning, regulation of emotions, self-awareness, introspection, taking perspective, and compassion. So that's a really awesome change in the brain, I would say. Okay, so now let's talk about why yoga and mindfulness with the incarcerated population. So given these numerous evidence-based benefits of yoga and mindfulness that we only scratched the surface of, if you combine that with the disproportionate rates of mental health issues among incarcerated individuals, it stands to reason, right, that these practices would be highly advantageous with the incarcerated population. Mental health disorders among prisoners have consistently exceeded the rates of these disorders in the general population. Some studies report that at least half of male inmates and up to 3/4 of female inmates report symptoms of mental health condition. If you compare that to the general population, which is about 9%, you can see just how vast that difference is. Suicide attempts, self-inflicted injuries are common in the incarcerated population. Untreated mental illness can also contribute to prison violence, often being the victim of prison violence. So a lot of studies have shown just what we would think, right? That using yoga and mindfulness practices with incarcerated populations can have a lot of good. Studies examining the effects of yoga have shown that it can reduce negative affect, reduce depression, reduce stress and anxiety, and just improve the emotional well-being among inmates. Low impulse control. I think someone in the chat mentioned impulse control as a benefit of yoga and mindfulness. So that's a particularly good benefit for this population. Yoga and meditation can also provide benefits to directly address the negative effects of imprisonment. So if you think of the loss of family, loss of life, like loss of liberty, being incarcerated, it causes someone to experience the loss of the capacity to govern their own body, while ongoing yoga and meditation practices put you squarely in your body. You are taking control of your mind and your body. Another thing I really liked is just this thought that yoga and mindfulness can help people transcend everyday life, transcending everyday life. So on that, let's go to the next slide, because I think, yes, it's transcending the constrained here and now. So in a prison art class, at a facility that allowed their incarcerated persons to do yoga, one of the inmates painted himself with wings and wrote, "I represent myself with wings because I felt that I was not here during the class. It was like being in another dimension. I felt like I was a plane, seeing everything from the sky, but without the plane." So we interviewed a lot of people for this project. This presentation is actually being turned into an article for submission in the Association for Creativity and Counseling journal. So I interviewed Megan, who's a certified yoga instructor with trauma-informed training and taught at an East Coast Correctional Facility. She noted that she found the yoga practices best for women with substance abuse or mental health issues, that it was empowering, and like we just talked about, that they really enjoyed simply getting out of their cells. If nothing else, just being able to transcend what they're going through in a moment. Tiffany is an incarcerated individual, was an incarcerated individual who taught yoga and Pilates to other women during her stay. She said that it could help them focus on something other than missing their families, that it was a safe space for growth. Many women cried due to a release from very painful memories, if you think of the trauma of people who are incarcerated, particularly women who are incarcerated. And then I also interviewed former CMHC student Melissa Smith, who's an alcohol and drug counselor and works with individuals with criminal backgrounds. So even though we're talking about using yoga with incarcerated individuals, it can be helpful for people who have returned from incarceration and are now dealing with the real world. So she found that therapeutic yoga helped with relapse prevention, improving self-esteem, and just maintaining healthy habits and a healthy daily routine after incarceration. Okay, and then I think this might be my final slide before I give it to Jordan, but reducing recidivism. So as Jordan will talk about, prison yoga can become a little bit of a politicized issue, and that some people think, why are we letting people who did bad things have nice things? Well, at least maybe we can all agree that yoga can reduce recidivism, which is a benefit for society as a whole. Yoga has the potential to reduce antisocial behavior. An antisocial personality pattern, as we know, is often associated with criminality. Yoga has the ability to reduce aggression, improve impulse control, like we talked about. The tools that people learn from yoga, it gives them a higher chance of taking personal responsibility, achieving transformation, and successfully reintegrating. That comes from Prison Yoga Project, which is a great group. I encourage you to check out their website. And a study at Wake Correctional Center showed that of the inmates who attended more than 4 classes, 8.5% were reincarcerated, while 25.2% of those who attended fewer than 4 classes were reincarcerated during the same period.
All right, so now we're going to get into the boring stuff, the statistics, but it's not as, now that we have like the background and Jen was able to give you all the benefits, so now I'm going to give you some of the statistical portions of these. So obviously we all know that there's an issue with African Americans and Hispanics, the majority of them taking up the population of the incarceration population. And so obviously we have here that, you know, African American children represent 32% who are detained, and 52% of those cases are judicially waived to the criminal courts. African Americans and Hispanics make up approximately 32% of the population, but they comprise 56% of all of the incarcerated people. And yes, it was in 2015, so I'm sure at some point Jen and I are going to have to redo this presentation with the newer statistics. But I thought it was really interesting when we were doing this work that there is such a high percentage rate of these individuals in particular in this population. And as you'll see as we get into it, that I interviewed someone from the Prison Yoga Project that Jen just mentioned, and he gave me some really insightful information that we'll talk about closer to the end. But so just some more from the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. African Americans constituted 2.3 million of the total 6.8 in the correctional population. And then African Americans are incarcerated at more than 5 times the rate of Caucasians, which it's been an issue for a long time. And so I'm wondering if we ever end up doing this, you know, coming back to this project, I wonder if we're going to have some different statistics at some point, or, you know, if there's going to be a change that has been made at somewhere down the line. So I'm hoping that these statistics change at some point. So some cultural considerations. So Kemetic yoga, when I first started doing this project, I had no idea what Kemetic yoga was. And so, I mean, if you've ever heard of it, you could definitely put it in the chat box and give us some more insightful information on that. But based on my research, it's an ancient Egyptian practice and philosophy that they go off of, and they incorporate some of the same poses that we're all familiar with, the child's pose and the warrior's pose. And those particular poses came from the Egyptian gods in carvings and hieroglyphics that, you know, were found on the walls. And something that I've never heard of before was something called the Rule of 4 breathing technique. And so what they talked about was that the practitioners in particular moved and circulated the energy throughout the body. And so the ultimate goal with that was bringing oneself harmony within the universe. And so this particular one was very spiritual based, and very in tune with your God, whichever that was. And so these particular poses, they differ from the one, so the sequences differ, but they're derived from the postures of the Egyptian gods on temple walls and in these hieroglyphics that we were talking about. So, all right, I think I had way more. I'm gonna go back. I don't know how I'm supposed to go back because I had way more to talk about. So when doing these particular poses of Kemetic yoga, like I was talking about, they're channeling the principles of a particular god that represents, as well as gaining the benefits of the position. So like I said before, it's very spiritual based, and that's something that I don't know if I'll talk about this later, but a lot of people don't, there's people that think that yoga is more of a spiritual and religious based practice, which it can be if that's the particular yoga that you practice, but and the yoga that we see and hear about today, it's all about focusing on your breathing and focusing on where you are in your own mindset. But in this particular yoga, based on, hundreds of thousands of years ago, it was based solely on spirituality and, connecting with a specific God that you call to. Okay, so legal and ethical considerations. This was fun because obviously there's really no legal and ethical situation that we have to come to when we're just practicing yoga on our own, but the fact that we're bringing this into a population where their rights have fundamentally been taken away in some shape or form. So we had to figure out what would be a legal and ethical consideration in this particular standpoint. So obviously we have to figure out, okay, so who's going to be facilitating these sessions? And so the instructor obviously needs to have and maintain some sufficient competence in this particular area. And while, not every psychotherapist and not every psychologist is going to have a formal training in yoga. So that's another thing that we have to consider when, taking on these individuals and putting them into a situation where they may not necessarily want someone coming into their space. And so we have to make sure that if we are bringing someone in, they have that background knowledge. So, and then some ethical standards when an area is still emerging, the clinician needs to take reasonable and appropriate steps to make sure that their work is competent and, they're making sure that their client is protected. And then obviously the physical contact and portion of yoga. When I go to yoga classes, there's small touching on the lower back and making sure your posture is correct. Obviously, that's a norm, but in a prison situation, that obviously can't be the case. And so when I talk about my interview with Bill Brown, who works in the Prison Yoga Project, he was able to give me some more information on that. So let's see. So some other ethical issues. So I brought up a couple of ACA codes that we could talk about, but if I'm not sure if I can manage the chat box when I'm recording, but if anyone wants to either chime in or type into the chat box some other ethical issues that you can think of that would be something that we would need to consider when working with this population. So I just, the principles of avoiding harm in multiple relationships. So obviously the multiple relationships portion, I read that obviously if the practitioner that the inmate is coming to see on a weekly, monthly basis, if that individual were to become the yoga instructor, that would be sort of a conflict of interest, and that could be something that could cause issues down the line. So I'm not sure if anyone else has any other codes or ethical issues that they want to chime in.
I'm monitoring the chat, but yeah, guys, just jump in. We like our presentations here to be as interactive as possible. And what can you think if you were a counselor who was working with the incarcerated population and incorporating yoga practices, what concerns might you have? Like I'll just start when Jordan was talking about the touch. Tiffany, who I interviewed,
Excuse me.
bless you. She was saying that, you know, sometimes the women would make it a sexualized practice, you know, and you know, doing stretches that were purposely sexual because that was, you know, their escape, or they needed that, or for whatever reason. And how would you handle that? That might not be something that you're used to dealing with in a, you know, in a regular office environment. Elizabeth put in the comments, relaxation could possibly trigger clients to past traumatic events. Yeah, I mean, and yoga is just, you know, it's indicated for trauma because, you know, like we talked about earlier, it gets you out of thinking about the past and into the present, but it can be so emotional. Certain poses and certain breathing techniques and just certain meditations can be emotional. You can start thinking about trauma. We know that the incarcerated population has a high likelihood of experiencing trauma. So how do you handle that? Are you capable? Are you trained to handle that? Are you confident in that area?
So what else do we need when we're working with this population? And so obviously, as with any activity or any therapeutic consultation, the risks and benefits have to be discussed. And with this population, it's no different. Just because, you know, they, you know, were said to have committed a crime and they're here, that doesn't mean that they just get to, you know, be brought in without letting them know and making a decision for themselves. So the risks and benefits of this particular yoga, if you were in this area, this population, what would be some of them that you would discuss? So for me, you know, I would obviously, like we were talking about, you know, triggers of PTSD can become an issue. And so obviously I would let them know that, you know, in this particular setting, your mind can go to some different places, and you know, you can be triggered with your PTSD symptoms. And if that's the case, we would have to, you know, work together to come up with some type of protocol to figure out, like, okay, if this is too much, you can leave, you can, you know, excuse yourself. But in this particular situation, I'm not entirely sure if they have that right, or if they have that freedom to just be able to say, okay, I don't want to do this anymore. So that would be something that we would have to look at. And then obviously informed consent is a big one too. So they need, obviously these people, they deserve the right to know the significant information about yoga, you know, what it could do for them, you know, what they could possibly get out of it, obviously what it would entail. So they would need to know, like, you know, the types of poses. And, you know, as I'll get into in a little bit, Bill Brown from the Prison Yoga Project, he gave me a lot of information about that type of voluntary, you know, I should say involuntary. It's not a voluntary thing where, you know,
Mandatory.
Right, the mandatory. That's that's the word that I was thinking. It's not mandatory.
It's been a long morning already.
I know. So they're able to just come in and participate, or they don't have to, and they're not made to do anything. So, and obviously, yes, the ability to decide whether or not to participate is totally up to them. And like you'll hear, the yoga practitioners, when they're coming in to these prisons, they obviously know that they're going to have individuals that are not necessarily going to agree, but as you'll see, this is actually a form of an activity that's actually widely liked and used.
We got a couple great considerations in the chat real quick. So Jamie said, in the prison setting, would you have guards circling the room for safety? Yeah, so just think about that for a second. What would be the pros and cons of having guards in the room? You know, that is absolutely something you would need to consider. Does that,
Well,
Elizabeth, oh, sorry, was that you, Jordan?
yeah, no, I was just gonna say, like, obviously the yoga instructor isn't, I mean, he or she is putting herself in a very vulnerable position. And obviously, these people may have an alternate agenda. Something may trigger in them when they're going through their yoga poses. And, those guards are there, I think, more as a protection, and not necessarily like to, stand and rule and, give some type of order. I think it's definitely like a protective measure. So
Amy put in the chat, guards might be intimidating to the inmates. I can certainly see that in a space where you're supposed to, be relaxed, and someone's circling you with a gun or pepper spray or whatever. Elizabeth wrote, are they given an alternate activity? Right. So if we're offering people yoga, we're saying you can do it or not do it. The people who don't want to do it, are we providing something for them? And Jerry said, if yoga was offered to the prison population, would it be offered to all, including possibly those on isolation and those on death row?
That's a good question. I didn't look that deep into it, but that would be really interesting to find out for sure.
Dominique said, the person's ability, absolutely. So if they're elderly or they have physical limitations, certain poses might be a safety problem. I would say that the yoga teacher or facilitator would have to be skilled in adapting the poses for people's ability levels. Alan said, could the clients truly feel calm when being watched by guards, especially if they're male? Yeah, so I was thinking that too, the gender differences. If you're a female yoga instructor, are you going to work with male clients and vice versa? And then Brian wrote, I worked with a lot of folks in the criminal justice system. Definitely not the work for everyone. Yes, that's true. But I find that using humor, being as human as possible, and sometimes even relaxing boundaries a bit can be helpful. For example, the story about making sexual poses, acknowledging that these folk have been restricted from any sexual contact for so long and not getting immediately offended, restrictive about such actions could build trust with the group. I love that. I think that's so true, because if you're just immediately chastising them for, thinking of something sexual, they're in prison, they might have those thoughts. They might need that time just to get away, just to laugh, to joke a little bit. And it's balancing how much is okay, how much is disruptive for the other people. There's a lot of considerations.
All right. So within the politics of this, so obviously Jen had mentioned this earlier, but it's a very politicized area. And obviously yoga within a prison system is considered and looked at as a luxury that should definitely be denied in these types of settings. But there's also Jen and I who obviously disagree with that. And obviously we have the information to back that up, but there's certain areas that just believe that these people in prison just don't deserve anything. And this would be like a gift that they don't deserve. So, and obviously there's a divide whether incarceration be punitive or rehabilitative. And so we'd like to hear some of your thoughts because obviously it's a catch-22. Like this person, committed a murder. This person was found on, rape or whatever it was. And then, we're coming in here, with the fact that we want them to be able to have some sort of, and I wouldn't call prison yoga a luxury. I think it's definitely just like a recreational, like they get to go to the gym, they get to go play basketball. So what's the difference between having an hour of basketball time and an hour of yoga? So that's my standpoint, but I'd love to hear some of your thoughts. And obviously this is a very open discussion. And if you don't feel comfortable talking about something, or if your views are a little bit more aggressive than others, maybe we could talk about that at a different meeting. But in just terms of whether you think yoga would be a good rehabilitative source for these individuals, we'd love to hear your thoughts. And then obviously the counselor's role and the counselor's ethical and legal responsibility. So those are something that we want to definitely take into consideration when we're working with these individuals, because you know, we as a counselor know why they're there, and maybe, you know, they're there for the wrong reason, or maybe they just want someone to, I know just as a human, I always want someone to talk to. So if there's someone there that's going to help me sort of work through, you know, my mental spider webs or whatever you want to call them, that I definitely think that that is a positive in this. So I'm not sure what the chats are doing, Jen, because I can't check.
We have some good things in the chat, and you know, of course, you can come off mute and chime in if you want to do that too. So let me see. What's going up? Okay, Dominique said they have cable television. Why not yoga? Amy said, agree with the physical activity point. Inmates are typically allowed to do physical activities like running or lifting weights. Why should yoga then not be allowed? Jamie said, in other countries in Europe, their jails don't even have bars or cells. It's like dorms. Yeah, it's different jails have different policies, and different countries have different cultures. Alan said, how are we supposed to rely on rehabilitating the prison population if we're not willing to provide activities to help rehabilitate? Yeah, that's kind of like my belief, is that yoga, you know, like Jordan said, isn't a luxury. It's providing them with mental health services to, you know, to a point. Alexander said, great as a mental distressor. Sometimes regular physical activity isn't enough. Sarah, I work in a juvenile prison setting, and I've noticed that there is not a lot of buy-in to things like art and relaxation techniques. How do you help create buy-in for young men in yoga? Ooh, great question. Yep, because it's, you know, we go back to those gender role stereotypes, and you know, where does yoga fall? Who does yoga?
Right.
Lee said, yes, definitely it would be useful. School systems have replaced detention with yoga and mindfulness practices and have shown a decrease in behaviors that would solicit detention. Why not in prisons? Yeah, absolutely. Like we were talking about with the decrease in antisocial behaviors, decrease in aggression. I think that it's good for everyone. And Kira said, working in we have a lot of a lot of comments in here. I won't read them all because you guys can read them all, but just people putting, you know, I appreciate you putting your thoughts in here. Kira, I say clients that engage in yoga in a halfway house were more focused on their substance use disorder treatment and demonstrated more positive attitudes. Mackenzie, humans are humans at the end of the day. Absolutely. Yeah, Mackenzie said, I'm even of the belief that pedophilic criminals, although obviously wrong, should have the ability to receive treatment as well as punishment. So that goes to that recidivism, decreasing recidivism point. Fiona, I think education should start with showing the benefits of yoga, not just exercise and relaxation, but increased ability to self-regulate. Jamie, skills building and coping. Jerry, yoga is being introduced to all aspects of society, proven to help folks with their growth. Yeah. So, you know, we have a room right now full of probably all counselors or people in the counseling or helping field in some way. And I wish that everybody felt like you guys did. So that's where advocacy comes in, and educating people even in our field on what are the benefits. How can we sell this to jails and prisons in our areas? How can we make them believe that this isn't just some luxury that we're giving because we're caring people, but that it's going to help us all?
Well, thank you for that awesome discussion. I was not expecting that, but I'm so glad everyone chimed in and we were able to sort of bounce ideas off of each other. So this is an interview I did with Bill Brown, and he's the executive director for the prison yoga project that Jen and I recently spoke about. And so he in particular trains and brings in these particular yoga instructors to these correctional settings and provides the particular classes for those who are interested. And so this was like an hour-long interview that we did, and he was telling me that prison boards actually reach out to him directly, and he has waiting lists of people to take his classes in the particular prisons that he brings this in. And so I thought it was really interesting that the prison boards actually go to him, because when I was starting this project, I was way under the assumption that, you know, these yoga instructors in these particular projects were going to these prisons and, you know, asking, hey, can we bring this particular, you know, mental health, you know, mindfulness-based practice to your prison, but that's not the case. People are reaching out to him and asking him to be able to come in and do that. And so I thought it was really interesting when we were speaking about the ethical and cultural considerations, because he was like, young and affluent white women are mostly what you see when you're in a yoga class or, in a camp or whatever. And so we have to consider how an affluent white young woman would look going into maybe like we talked about, an all African American or all Hispanic populated, mostly populated prison. And so now you're bringing a white woman into this. We have to figure out how that would create a barrier, because we are there not to act as a barrier. We're there to help, release some of the barriers within them with the mindfulness-based practices. And so we don't want to create any more than they already have. And so that's what he was sort of touching on. And it was really interesting to think like, hey, that's a really good point. Like, just the fact that it's me, and even though I am not here to cause any trouble, just being white and a young woman causes those issues for them. And so obviously we talked about physical touch, and while we did talk about how it could trigger PTSD, that's what he said. He said the touch can be triggering, and we're there to reduce those triggers for them, whether it be PTSD or some other trigger that that they could experience. And so he told me that the instructor is not allowed to get up and walk around. They have to stay seated at the front of the class on the mat for the entire session. And I asked him, and I was like, okay, well, what if there's like a different circumstance, and someone asks for help, or I just gave all the different types of questions. And he was like, if they ultimately had to end up getting up and walking around, they would have to announce that. So, hey, I'm getting up, I need to walk around, because obviously someone walking around, like we talked about, can be very intimidating and can actually bring up triggers as well. So I thought that was really, really interesting, because I had never done any research on this before. So I don't know why it's not letting me click. Let's see. I think that's all of mine. Like we said, with all the classes are voluntary, and so obviously if someone comes in and they decide differently, they don't have to participate. They can sit there, they can do whatever they need to do for the duration of the class, but it's definitely voluntary, and they make that choice of whether or not they want to participate. But I was under the assumption when I was talking with Bill that these people want this, and he's got waiting lists. And so these particular people taking these classes are the ones that reached out specifically and asked for those. So, yeah, I think that's all that I have. I don't know, Jen, if you want to continue, or if you want me to continue until our exercise.
Yeah, so we're gonna be completely ended in 10 minutes so that the next presentation can get in the room, because so the way that this conference works is there's going to be a new presentation in almost every room at the hour. So we want to make sure that the next presenter has time. We will end with the brief couple-minute exercise, being respectful of everyone's ability levels and space. So we're probably just going to do a breathing mindfulness exercise. But let's see if anyone has questions or just thoughts. Feel free to jump off mute or put in the chat about anything we've talked about.
Or anything you'd like to know more of, because obviously Jen and I are going to have to do some more research to change.
And you have two conference chairs in this room with you, so if you have questions about the conference itself, you have our undivided attention.
Definitely.
Okay, Elizabeth, any idea on statistics on how many prisons in the U.S. are utilizing this practice? Oh, I believe that that's something Prison Yoga Project probably keeps track of. Mm-hmm. And my guess would be it'd be kind of hard to delineate, like, do they have yoga that's being led by another inmate? Do we count that? Is it yoga that's being led by, a facilitator that comes in Is it yoga that's trauma focused by someone who's skilled in the field? But yeah, I would say, Elizabeth, I would say the Prison Yoga Project website might be a good for that. And that kind of answers Rebecca's question too about additional books. Can you scroll real quick to our references?
Yes.
And then we can just show like some of our references. No, Amy, we haven't. I know so Amy asked, have we ever taught or witnessed a class in a prison setting? No, just interviewing others, you know. And Brian said, not a question, but a suggestion of someone who might want to talk to David Prescott. Does a lot of trauma-forced yoga. Okay, cool. Melissa, how long were the yoga sessions? Depends on each research study. Most of the ones about the statistics I read early in the presentation were 60-minute yoga practices. And Lisa, do you start with some psychoeducation around yoga with the inmates before beginning the actual yoga sessions? I would think that goes hand in hand with informed consent a little bit. So I would say yes, and talking about why we're doing this. So here's, I know it's kind of maybe small to see, but these are some of the resources we used. There's probably another page right here. Okay. Yeah, Prison Yoga Project.
And when I actually reached out to the Prison Yoga Project and I went to their contact information, I didn't really think that I was gonna, hear back from him, but he responded back within 24 hours. So I'm not entirely sure how that works with all the other individuals on the board, but if you definitely have some question that we didn't answer or you don't find on the website, I mean, I had a good time being able to reach out to them and them reach back. So that could definitely work too if you guys were interested.
Any screening process implemented if there's a waiting list? I think there absolutely should be. Again, I think that depends on the individual prison or jail's policies and the particular facilitator's policies. But gosh, we have screening processes for every group that counselors have, every client that we see. So I think there should be screening processes. A question to think about, or maybe people can answer in the chat, what would we be looking for? Who would we exclude? Right, so Sydney just said what type of things would be screened for. Off the top of my head, I would say, active violence, if it's somebody who, is in solitary because they're fighting with people. The things that we wouldn't use in a group setting, in a counseling group, I would say screen for. Jerry put in a private chat, but I think it's great for everyone. How would you advocate with legislators to have yoga introduced to the prison population? I would present them with this PowerPoint. I would go to their office. But no, I would probably stress the benefits to society as a whole, the reduction in recidivism, the fact that, and then I would do more research too on effective implementation, so costs, things like that.
Right up your alley, because I would not have been able to answer that question.
Right. And I think probably you would go to the prison or jail boards first before going to the legislators, because I think that it would be their call. But the legislators, if they could introduce some kind of bill. All right, any other questions before we're gonna lead you in a brief guided meditation?
It's easy, don't worry. Don't
It is easy.
We're not gonna put you in some weird.
Yeah. Everybody go to down dog right now. But yeah, so obviously we're not doing the yoga poses, but for anyone who practices yoga, think about power poses. So when we did this presentation at the Association for Creativity and Counseling Conference, we had people strike poses that were really empowering because we thought that was a great tool for people who were incarcerated, giving them that power back. So, standing tall, goddess pose is a big one for women. Just reclaiming your power, all those poses you might think of in your head, and then maybe even poses for vulnerability. Okay, so we don't need this slide for it, but maybe it has a relaxing background that we can look at while
Oh no, where does it go?
We go back. Look, man, technology and working on it. Okay.
All right, so I invite you all. You're home. You've been home for a long time, probably. Hopefully you're in your pajamas, at least from the bottom like me. So I invite you to just get comfortable in your chair for a moment. You can close your eyes or soften your gaze. Put your hands on your stomach and just feel your breath. Feel your belly rise as you inhale and fall as you exhale. Soften the skin of your forehead. Notice any of your body that is clenching, and just try to relax. I'm going to lead you in a check-in. And while I do that, I invite you to keep your eyes closed or your gaze lowered and continue breathing deeply. So first, I want you to check in on your physical self. How does your body feel right now, physically? If there are any parts of your body that feel tight, can you soften them? Can you relax even further? Next, I want you to check in on your mental self, those thoughts that are going through your head. We're humans, we have a million thoughts racing through our heads at any given moment. But I invite you just to, without judging them, just take stock of your mind and where it's going. And if there are any thoughts that aren't serving you at this moment, you can just place them on the shelf and return to them at any point. Next, I want you to check in on your emotional self. If you were to label your emotion right now. Again, please do this without judgment. If you feel tired, if you feel cranky, stressed, it's okay. And finally, I want you to check in on your spiritual self, whatever that means to you. So this might be a moment of prayer or a quiet meditation of recognition of something greater than yourself. Continue breathing. Next, I want you to take the deepest breath you've taken all day, all morning. Don't be afraid to make some noise on your exhale. You're on mute. You can flutter your eyes open if they're closed. And the hardest yoga move is just raising the corners of your mouth way up to your ears. Thank you, guys. I don't know. Yeah. Any closing thoughts, questions? Thank you, guys. Yeah, if you're in your office, that might have been hard to do.
So I'm looking, we have 58 participants, Jen. That's
awesome.
That we had at our conference. That's awesome.
Yeah,
Thank you so much for coming in and sharing.
Thank you. I'd love to know where everyone's from. Like I know we have people from the Chicago school. Before you hop off,
I'm here in Las
Maryland,
Vegas,
yeah.
so West Coast over here.
Austin, wow, we have people. Oh my gosh, this is exciting. And please, if you go to other presentations today and there's hiccups, you know, there's going to be hiccups. Just roll with it.
Yeah,
it's tough planning. Yeah.
We appreciate your patience.
Yeah.
Sure.
Right. All right, guys, we'll go. Hopefully you're a little bit more relaxed now than when you started the day. We really appreciate you coming here. The recording will be posted on the CMHC YouTube channel, the recording for every presentation.
Yep. Thank you so much, everyone. I actually have to hop off for another presentation, so thank you so much. And Jen, I'll see you in about an hour.
Thanks, Jordan. Can you stop recording?
Yes.